What's up, guys? This is a video about structured game and natural game. For those of you who are unfamiliar, these are two different schools of thoughts in the pickup community. I'm going to talk about the origins of each of them. I'll be going over some pros and cons, as well as some common misconceptions about each of these approaches to social skills. Then I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about which one I recommend to beginners. To start things off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins of the seduction community. In the early days of the pickup community, when everything was on internet forums and Usenet groups, there was no such thing as natural game. That wasn't a school of thought in the early pickup community. People didn't take quote-unquote natural approach to meeting women. Everything was structured pickup, meaning that everyone generally agreed that there was some underlying structure to social interactions, and if you could understand that structure, you could use it to improve your social skills. There would be no modern pickup community if it weren't for this structured approach to dating skills in the early days. Back then, the skill of pickup was broken into two separate categories, and these categories were inner game and outer game. Inner game is about getting in the right headspace. It's all about mindsets, self-image, your idea of your own self-worth, the ability to manage your emotions when you're doing pickup. Basically, anything having to do with your internal state is referred to as inner game. For example, if you're feeling generally depressed, or you have feelings of anger towards women, or when you're doing pickup, if you get really angry when you get rejected, these are all issues that are solved with inner game. You need to learn how to manage your own internal state and learn to have a positive and healthy outlook in order to develop your pickup skills. Outer game, on the other hand, is all about the actual techniques you will use when you're doing cold approach pickup. It's the idea that there is an underlying structure to all social interactions. And when you're doing pickup, each set goes through a linear progression, meaning there's some logical steps that you can break each interaction into, so you always know what you're supposed to be doing at any given time. You also have various gambits, tactics, and routines that you can use to move each set forward. The techniques that you learn from outer game will help you know exactly what you're supposed to be saying, so you don't get stuck when you're doing game. And the idea of doing analysis and regular review of your approaches via field reports or even just a personal journal is an essential part of outer game. Another way of thinking about these two skill sets is that inner game is a bottom-up skill progression, meaning that by developing the right mindsets and attitudes, you will naturally become the kind of person who is attractive to women. Outer game, on the other hand, is a top-down skill development process, meaning that you're sort of reverse engineering what works in social situations and using those techniques to get the results you want. In my personal opinion, it's not enough to just do inner game or just do outer game. You need both a bottom-up strategy and a top-down strategy, and you need them to meet in the middle. It's very important to be in the right headspace when you're doing game, and it's also very important to have some sort of strategic approach, because that's how your skill set gets better. A lot of people will say that confidence is the most important thing that you can have when meeting women, but I totally disagree with this. Think about riding a motorcycle. Would you rather be confident or would you rather be competent? So would you rather feel like you're in control, or would you rather know how to ride the motorcycle? Now, over the years, inner game has sort of evolved into natural game. So all of these ideas about developing the right mindset and sort of having this bottom-up skill development is what gave rise to natural game. Natural game is the idea that you rely mostly on improvisation when you're running your sets. And it basically assumes that with the right mindsets, your improvisation will be good enough to be successful long term. It's very common for people who are proponents of natural game to have a somewhat negative outlook on structured game or outer game. They think that outer game is a little bit too analytical or a little bit too structured, and it doesn't allow for enough flexibility, or it doesn't permit the people doing it to be authentic enough or to let their true personalities come through. And I think this is a really, really common misconception. A lot of people think that outer game means finding material that other people have developed and then just copying that and using it in your own sets when you're doing pickup. And this is not true. Outer game is not canned game. And that's not the way that a lot of the early pickup instructors who developed these ideas intended it to be used. Now, this image will be familiar for some of the people who have watched my other videos. This is an excerpt from the Love Systems Routines Manual. And what they basically say here is the way to use routines in pickup is to use them as a jumping off point and then eventually develop your own material. To quote the book, tweak and change them to make your own versions. The goal is for you to come up with completely new routines yourself. So anyone who really understands pickup and is teaching structured game is not teaching canned material. They are teaching you an underlying structure so that you can develop your own material that will be very authentic when you deliver it. This is a picture of Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. I read something very interesting about Augustus in a biography a long time ago. And it said that Augustus had a habit of writing down everything he was going to say in public. So he would keep detailed records of speeches he would give or things he would plan to bring up with friends. He would even write down things that he wanted to talk to his own wife about. So he was very, very strict in preparing for his social engagements. And this is exactly the idea of structured pickup. Now, writing down everything that you're going to say is a little bit extreme, but I just wanted to illustrate that it's very, very common for successful people to have this kind of analytical approach to social interactions. They do this because it's extremely helpful and it ensures that your interactions will be much more smooth, especially if you're someone who is prone to anxiety or feels very uncomfortable when they're engaging with other people. When you're learning any sort of skill set, you go through different stages of development in learning that skill. The first stage of learning any skill is this bottom part of the pyramid here. It's unconscious incompetence. This basically means you know absolutely nothing about whatever skill you're learning. You're a total beginner, you're totally clueless. You might try stuff, but your intuition is all wrong, so it doesn't matter. The next stage is conscious incompetence, which means that you're starting to learn the skill set and you're aware that there's some things you're doing wrong, but maybe you haven't figured out how to analyze those things correctly. So you're not able to do it at a competent level, really. But you're at least aware of what you're doing wrong, so that's good. So this is one level up from total beginner. And the next stage is conscious competence, and this is where you start to actually be good at whatever skill you're learning. You're able to break down what you're doing and figure out what you're doing wrong and then correct those things. And then the final stage is unconscious competence. And this is when you can do something without thinking. It's just second nature. You don't even need to consider what you're doing anymore. For example, after you learn how to ride a bike, you're at this level of unconscious competence where you don't need to think about how to balance the bike. You don't need to think about where your feet are supposed to be going. You can just ride the bike and it doesn't require a great deal of focus. Unconscious competence is the level that all masters of any skill are at. So for example, jazz musicians who are able to improvise at a very high level have reached unconscious competence. Now, if we think about this skill progression pyramid from the perspective of cold approach pickup, this section of the pyramid right here, this bottom half, so unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence, this is where you need structured game the most, because like I said before, you don't know what you don't know. It's very important to have some sort of underlying structure to guide you as you're learning this skill set. But what happens is that as you get better and as you move up to this area of the pyramid, this upper half here, this is where your game gradually starts to be more and more natural, meaning that you can improvise successfully. Because what happens is you start to internalize a lot of the underlying structures and you don't need to rely on them as much. But it's very important to start with structured game because that's what gives you the foundation to be able to improvise effectively. If you flip this around and you just start trying natural game from the beginning, you're just not going to know what you're doing wrong. And that's a big problem when you're trying to develop your skill set. So your results are going to be kind of random, and that's not good. You want to have as much control over your interactions as you possibly can. And when things go wrong, you want to be able to hone in on exactly what happened so that you can correct it next time. When you're just improvising, you're not going to have a great idea of what's going wrong, and you're not going to really know how to analyze it without the underlying structure. Now let's talk about what that underlying structure is so you can actually start to use it in some of your pickup. This graphic on the screen right now is something called the M3 model by Mystery. And this is really the most accurate model you can apply to pickup. All pickup models or structures that came after this are derived from the M3 model. All pickup is based on this model right here. So you'll find small differences, but the progression is exactly the same. How the M3 model works is that there is 3 different sections here. There's attraction, comfort, and seduction. Attraction is when you open the girl and you start flirting and teasing and have some light banter going on. So you get the girl to show some interest in you, and then you also show some interest in the girl. And then comfort is when you start to really develop rapport with a girl and you start to deepen your feeling of connection. And seduction is everything that happens leading up to sex. Now, this is an overly simplified explanation of the M3 model, but that's basically what it consists of. Now compare that with the London DeGame model, which is a newer pickup model developed mostly by the DeGame.com guys, if I'm correct. And this one is broken down into 5 different stages: opening, stacking, which is where flirting and topic generation happens; vibing, which is lighthearted chat about a common topic; investment, where you're connecting and getting to know each other; and close, where you get her contact details. This should seem very, very familiar to the M3 model that I just explained. They use different terminology, but all of the steps are in roughly the same order, right? So first, you're going to do the lighthearted flirting and topic generation stuff, which is exactly the same in the M3 method. And then you're going to progress to investment, which is where you're connecting and getting to know each other. This is exactly the same as the comfort phase in mystery method. So you can see that while these two structures differ in some ways, they're actually very similar. And if you actually look at what other pickup coaches are teaching or doing, almost all of them are doing standard mystery method progression in their pickup. Even people who are talking about natural game are still doing mystery method. So it doesn't really matter much which specific model or which specific structure you're using when you're doing cold approach pickup, but it's very, very helpful to use some structure because it gives you a general guideline to how to run an interaction, and that's very, very valuable when you're a beginner. Once your skill set starts to improve, you can focus more on improvisation and rely less and less on these structures once you've started to internalize them. All right, guys, that's all for today, and I hope you learned something. Specifically, I hope that I was able to introduce structured game in a way that's appealing to a lot of the people watching this, because it is a very, very useful approach to learning social skills. If you have any questions about any of the stuff I talked about in this video, please leave them in the comments below and I will answer them myself. Thanks, guys, and see you next time.